All right, we're going to move on to async generator functions. What the heck are these? Well, they just combine regular async functions, which always returns a promise, with regular generator functions, which makes objects iterable. So async generator functions returns an iterable object wrapped in a promise. And internally, this is called a generator object. Let's go to the right. Let's review async functions. If I just define a regular async function like this, and I call it, you see that it returns a promise. But did you know you can also check if something is a promise by calling it and then doing square brackets, symbol dot to tag string? Yeah. Because this symbol is what an object needs in order to turn into a promise. Just like if our object had symbol.iterator, it's loopable. Symbol.toString tag, promise, allows it to be a promise. Okay, so now let's see how we can use our generator async functions. And this is useful because you can resolve a series of promises in the order that you want asynchronously. Okay, async function star, I'll call this waiting. Okay. Now, this is just going to yield, and you can also use the keyword await. What are we awaiting for? We're waiting for the call of P1 and P2 and P3 and so on. Okay, so P2, P3, and P4. 2, 3, and 4. But how do we get the values of these? Well, you can't directly just call this function. Okay, let's see what happens if we call it waiting. Well, we get suspended. It doesn't let us do that. Okay, because it has to return an internal generator object. Okay, what if we do waiting dot next? Whoops, we have to call waiting first. We get a promise pending. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to define another async function, but just a regular async function. I'll call this running, and then it will run a for loop. So you can say for, and then you have to use await. Const value of waiting, and then we call the waiting. Now I'm going to do console.log the value, and then down here I will call running. Now let's see what we get on the right. So we get P1 done in 2 seconds, P2 done in 1 second. See, so it actually waits to complete it in the order that you want. Okay. But now we get an error because P3 rejected, so it doesn't run P4. Okay. So remember, yield will only yield the results if it is resolved. But we can make this so that it also handles rejection cases. So in short, we can actually do error handling right inside of here. Okay, let's see how we can improve our two functions. Now, before that, you might think that, hey, since yield is already awaiting for this promise, why do I have to await for it again here? Well, that's because of the async keyword on the outside. It doesn't matter what yield or what anything does inside of the function body. If it's an async function, it will return whatever is returned inside wrapped in a promise. Okay? So async generator functions do not cancel out what async does, and yield does not cancel out what async does. Therefore, it's wrapped in a promise, so we have to await the value here. So if we take away this await, it actually doesn't work. See, it's not iterable. So you have to await it. Okay? It has to await everything, and then it does the yield, then it becomes iterable. Okay, let's improve these two functions. So I will delete everything for now. So let's change this to waiting all promises, and it will take in an array of promises. Okay. Now, here we can just do const, and then we can do, actually, let's do a for off loop. For const val of ARR. Okay. We're going to yield await val dot. Well, we have to await the return call of val first. And then since the return call of val is a promise, we can do error handling straight away with .catch. Catch error, and then we're gonna console.log. Let's do your error is, and then plus the error. Whoops, plus E, like this. Okay, and then async function run all. Now we can do for await const value of waiting for all promises, passing in our array of P1, P2, P3, and P4. And then for this, we're gonna console.log the value, okay? And then we're gonna call run all in the global scope. Let's see what we get. We get P1 done, P2 done. Let's see, okay? We get the error handled, and then since the error was handled with the catch, which doesn't prevent your program from freezing, the P4 will then take care of itself, right? Now, because of this for loop, even if P4 were to reject, it will still handle that. Okay. Let's see, P1, P2, P3 is taking a while, P3, and then rejected. All right. Oops, reject is not defined, line 19. Oh, that's because I forgot to put it here, but you get the point. Okay, now, can we do something that's a little bit more useful? Let's try doing this with a real API call. All right, so now I have an empty object, and then I define this async generator function. What it does is that it's going to fetch from JSON placeholder the array of users, posts, and to-dos, and our goal is to update our object so that it contains all of the fetch data that we got from here. So we want my obj.users will have the user's data. How can we do this with generators? Okay, so remember, whenever you define an async generator function, you have to follow it up to get the values by defining a regular async function. So async function, let's just call this update. Okay. So how are we going to update our object? Well, let's look at what's returned. Okay. This, even though it's a function, since it returns something iterable due to the star here, making it a generator, it means we can actually loop through this function call. And every time we loop through this function call, each time the value will be whatever we put after yield. Okay. So for update, we can do for await constant value of generate, we call it, and then here we're going to console.log the value. Let's see what we get. Oops, and then I forgot we have to run update down here. Okay, so we get all the yield, and remember, it doesn't stop at the last yield. It still runs whatever you want it to run. Okay, so that's why you have this all fetches done if you see this. Okay, so now inside of our body, we can do my obj, and then square brackets at what? Well, remember each iteration, we get an array, right? So at value first index, value's first index will be users, posts, or to-dos. It's going to be equal to value at 1, which is the data. Okay. Okay. And then now that we call update and we see this, it means our obj is updated. My obj. Cool, right? Now, what if I do console.log obj down here? Oops, it's supposed to be my obj. Okay. Now, it's actually an empty object. We only see everything in here because it updated itself. But if you console.log something like, let's say, object.keys, passing in my obj, and then asking for the length, and then up here, I'm going to do console.log, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Okay, so you see that all of the global stuff ran first, the console.log, and the my object.length which is 0. Do you remember why? Well, because whenever you call an async function and it sees the keyword await, it makes everything here async, and then it exits out to the global scope. It runs everything else. That's why we get this, and that's why we get 0 for the object keys.length, because this ran before it got the chance to update all the object properties. Cool, huh? So that's how you actually update things and get all the API data in the order that you want. Now remember, you can also do this with reduce. And I actually prefer to do it with reduce, but there are some cases where it's easier syntax-wise just to use a generator function like this, an async one. Okay, hope that was useful. Let's move on.